Good morning, everyone. My name is Kent Martins, and I'm very pleased to have you joining us here today for our Good Friday service. For those of you that may be guests here, there's washrooms through the back in what we call the hub, if you need those during the service. We also want to remind you that our services on Sunday for Resurrection Sunday are at 9 o'clock in the morning and also at 11 o'clock. And the 11 o'clock one is live streamed on our website. We're here together on Good Friday, and as for many years, the church throughout history actually has taken time on Friday of Passion Week to remember and reflect and mourn and even lament the crucifixion and death of Jesus of Nazareth, the Son of God. And not only do we lament the crucifixion of Jesus, but we're also mindful of our part in it. And our desire at Emmanuel is that we would have a personally owned and active faith in Jesus. And so for this to happen, we want to think about ourselves as well and our sin and our part in what we are talking about today. Our team has prepared a booklet, and if you'd like to follow along in elements of that, there'll be some time for reflective prayer. The word liturgy means the work of the people, so it's a way for us to be involved. There'll be some responsive readings and some opportunities for us to sing and pray and participate in that way. This booklet is actually referring to what was happening this morning, and this is a story of love. And we're saying this is love, this is victory this weekend. But you know, the victory doesn't happen until a bit later. And actually this story starts very early, actually at the very beginning, where God made a good world, and we sinned. Sin entered the world.
You see, sin had come into God's perfect world, and it would never leave. God's children would be always running away from him and hiding in the dark. Their hearts would break now and never work properly again. God couldn't let his children live forever, not in so much pain without him. There was only one way to protect them. You will have to leave the garden now, God told his children, his eyes filling with tears. This is no longer your true home. It's not the place for you anymore. But before they left the garden, God made clothes for his children to cover them. He gently clothed them, and then he sent them away on a long, long journey, out of the garden, out of their home. Well, in another story, it would be all over, and that would have been the end. But not in this story. God loved his children too much to let the story end there. Even though he knew he would suffer, God had a plan, a magnificent dream. One day, he would get his children back. One day, he would make the world their perfect home again. And one day, he would wipe away every tear from their eyes. You see, no matter what, in spite of everything, God would love his children with a never-stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love. And though they would forget him and run from him, deep in their hearts, God's children would miss him always and long for him. Lost children yearning for their home. Before they left the garden, God whispered a promise to Adam and Eve. It will not always be so. I will come to rescue you. And when I do, I'm going to do battle with that snake. I'll get rid of sin and the dark and the sadness you let in here. I'm coming back for you. And he would. One day, God himself would come.
Meanwhile, Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon, a man who previously had had leprosy. While he was eating, a woman came in with a beautiful alabaster jar of expensive perfume and poured it over his head. The disciples were indignant when they saw this. "What a waste," they said. "It could have been sold for a high price and the money given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, replied, "Why criticize this woman for doing such a good thing to me? You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. She has poured this perfume on me to prepare my body for burial. I tell you the truth. Wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed." Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, went to the leading priests and asked, "How much will you pay me to betray Jesus to you?" And they gave him 30 pieces of silver. From that time on, Judas began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. While the musicians play, there is a guide for personal prayer in your liturgical book under Betrayal.
On the way, Jesus told them, "Tonight, all of you will desert me. For the scriptures say, God will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised from the dead, I will go ahead of you to Galilee and meet you there." Peter declared, "Even if everyone else deserts you, I will never desert you." Jesus replied, "I tell you the truth, Peter, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." "No," Peter insisted. "Even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you." All the other disciples vowed the same. Meanwhile, Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A servant girl came over to him and said, "You were with those of Jesus, the Galilean." But Peter denied it in front of everyone. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Later, out by the gate, another servant girl noticed him and said to those around, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again, Peter denied it, this time with an oath. "I don't even know the man," he said. A little later, some of the other bystanders came over to Peter and said, "You must be with one of those, because we could tell by your Galilean accent." Peter swore, "A curse on me if I am lying. I don't know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. Suddenly Jesus' words flashed through Peter's mind. "Before the rooster crows, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." And Peter went away weeping bitterly. I'd like to now lead you in a confessional. I'll be reading the white lettered words and you can respond with the yellow. Merciful God, we meet each other today at the foot of the cross. As inhabitants of the world, we wait with each other as those who inflict wounds on one another. As those who, like Peter, have denied you in word or action. As those who deny justice to others. As those who put our trust in power. As those who are greedy. As those who put others on trial. As those who refuse to receive. As those who are afraid of the world's torment.
They went to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and Jesus said, "Sit here while I go and pray." He took Peter, James, and John with him, and he became deeply troubled and distressed. He told them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." He went on a little further and fell to the ground. He prayed that if it were possible, the awful hour awaiting him might pass him by. "Abba, Father," he called out, "everything is possible for you. Please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Then he returned and found the disciples asleep. He said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Couldn't you watch with me even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak." Then Jesus left them again and prayed the same prayers before. Then he returned to them again and found them sleeping, for they couldn't keep their eyes open, and they didn't know what to say. When he returned to them the third time, he said, "Go ahead and sleep, have your rest." But no, the time has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners.
I invite you to join me in the singing of The Old Rugged Cross, and if you're able, please stand.
Stood an old rugged cross, the emblem
Thank you. Please be seated.
Inside, the leading priests and the entire high council were trying to find evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. But they couldn't find any. Many false witnesses spoke against him, but they contradicted each other. Finally, some men stood up and gave this false testimony. "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days I will build another made without human hands.'" But even then they didn't get their story straight. Very early in the morning, the leading priests, the elders, and the teachers of the religious law, the entire high council, met to discuss their next step. They bound Jesus, led him away, and took him to Pilate, the Roman governor. Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "You have said it." Then the leading priests kept accusing him of many crimes, and Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer them? What about all these charges they are bringing against you?" But Jesus said nothing, much to Pilate's surprise.
Feel free to just listen and reflect on the words. His appearance was so badly marred he could not have been recognized. So disfigured, so beyond all human likeness that we hid our eyes. Though we carry all our griefs and bore our sorrows, we esteemed him not, but despised him and considered him afflicted, as one reviled by God. Though all of us have gone astray, though all have turned to their ways, the Lord has laid our wickedness on him. His punishment has brought us peace and crushed for our iniquities. He died to save his people from their sin. He was stricken, and though pierced for our transgressions, he did not lash out, but was silent, like a lamb led to the slaughter, so he opened not his mouth. Though all of us have gone astray, though all have turned to their ways, the Lord has laid our wickedness on him. His punishment has brought us peace and crushed for our iniquities. He died to save his people from their sins. The night of Yahweh stands revealed. I
So Pilate took Jesus and had him whipped. The soldiers, having braided a crown from thorns, set it on his head, threw a purple robe over him, and approached him with, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Then they greeted him with slaps in the face. Pilate went back out again and said to them, "I present him to you, but I want you to know that I do not find him guilty of any crime." Just then, Jesus came out wearing the thorn crown and purple robe. Pilate announced, "Here he is, the man." When the high priests and police saw him, they shouted in a frenzy, "Crucify, crucify!" Pilate told them, "You take him. You crucify him. I find nothing wrong with him." The Jews answered, "We have a law, and by that law he must die because he has claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he became even more scared. He went back into the palace and said to Jesus, "Where did you come from?" Jesus gave no answer. Pilate said, "You won't talk? Don't you know that I have the authority to pardon you and the authority to crucify you?" Jesus said, "You haven't a shred of authority over me, except what has been given to you from heaven. That's why the one who betrayed me to you has committed a far greater fault." At this, Pilate tried his best to pardon him, but the Jews shouted him down. "If you pardon this man, you are no friend of Caesar's. Anyone setting himself up as king defies Caesar." When Pilate heard those words, he led Jesus outside. He sat down at the judgment seat in the designated stone court. It was the preparation day for Passover. The hour was noon. Pilate said to the Jews, "Here is your king." They shouted back, "Kill him! Kill him! Crucify him!" How is this fair? How did it get this far that they would rather have Jesus, an innocent man who loved others, die in the place of a known criminal? Why would they want him to suffer like this? Does nobody else see the injustice? You, but you won't help yourself. How you stay silent now, I may never tell. My conscience says that I should leave you alone. I wish I could, but I'm no longer my own. I tried to reason with them all in vain. There is no pleasing without pain. Pain, 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 pain.
When they were finally tired of mocking him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him again. Then they led him away to be crucified. Along the way, they came across a man named Simon. He was from Cyrene, and the soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross. And they went out to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull. The soldiers gave Jesus wine mixed with bitter gall, and when he had tasted it, he refused to drink it. After they had nailed him to the cross, the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. Then they sat around and kept guard as he hung there. A sign was fastened above Jesus' head, announcing the charge against him. It read, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." 2 revolutionaries were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. The people passing by shouted abuse, shaking their heads in mockery. "Look at you now," they yelled at him. "You said you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Well then, if you are the Son of God, save yourself and come down from the cross." The leading priests, the teachers of religious law, and the elders also mocked Jesus. "He saved others," they scoffed, "but he can't save himself. So he is the King of Israel, is he? Let him come down from the cross right now, and we will believe in him." He trusted God, so let God rescue him now if he wants him. He said, "I am the Son of God."
Good Friday morning to everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Paul Gallisier. I am Barb Gallisier's husband. I am also a general surgeon, and I've been working and practicing in this area for almost 30 years. I was asked by Pastor Kent to share with you some insights into the suffering and crucifixion of Jesus from a medical perspective. I'd like to address 3 areas of interest in the Passion of Christ. The first is some unusual eyewitness observations that were recorded in the Gospel and their medical explanations. The second is some medical insights into the actual physical suffering of Roman crucifixion. And thirdly, I'd like to provide you with my own personal medical opinion as to the specific cause of death for Jesus. One very unusual observation which occurred in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before Jesus' crucifixion was when Christ was observed being in such anguish that it looked like he was sweating blood. Initially, critics of Christianity thought that this was hyperbole or even a false statement for dramatic effect, but there have been several recorded occurrences of this in the medical literature, and it is currently accepted as a very real but rare physiological event. It is known as hematidrosis. Heme for blood, drosis for sweat. It is a condition in which the capillary blood vessels that feed the sweat glands rupture, causing them to exude blood. You are literally sweating blood. It has been observed to occur under conditions of extreme physical and emotional stress. Another unusual eyewitness event that occurred was when the Roman centurion came to Jesus to break his legs to hasten his death, only to discover that he was already dead. The scriptures record that he used a spear to pierce his side, and a mixture of water and blood came out. Now, there are a few possible medical explanations for this. Under severe physiologic trauma, it is very common for pleural effusions, or water around the lungs, to form. This is a physiologic collection of clear fluid that forms around the lungs as a response to physiologic trauma. And I've observed pleural effusions and have drained many pleural effusions in my surgical career. The spear, which was most likely directed through the right lower chest wall, would have pierced the pleura, went through the lungs and into the right heart. What would happen is that you pierce the pleura and water would come out. You did advance the spear into the right heart and blood would come out. Literally, you would see a mixture of water and blood. There are actually some other feasible explanations for the water and blood, and if those who are interested, you can ask me about that after the service. Now I'd like to briefly discuss some medical aspects of Roman crucifixion. Crucifixion was practiced by the Romans primarily as a public display of power. It was meant to humiliate and torture its victims. It was designed as a deterrent reserved for non-citizens who were political enemies or serial criminals or revolutionaries against the Roman Empire. It would often take several days for their victims to die. After Jesus was whipped with leather straps, which were embedded with pieces of bone or lead shods, so that you can inflict maximal pain and damage, he was paraded through the streets naked, carrying the upper portion of his splintered cross. He was then nailed to this cross with 5-inch nails through his hands and feet. Now, in order to hold his body weight, these nails were likely not put through the palms of his hands, but likely through his wrists. The wrists have a very strong ligament, the transverse carpal ligament, and that could hold a man's body weight. The Romans strategically placed this nail between the radial artery on one side and the ulnar artery on the other, so that he would not bleed to death. The nail was driven right through the center of the wrist, right through the median nerve. I've been a surgeon for many years and I've operated on carpal tunnel syndrome thousands of times. In fact, I've had carpal tunnel syndrome. And I know how sensitive this nerve is. The idea that you would drive a 5-inch nail right through the median nerve, it would create such excruciating pain into the hands and up the arms. Just not imaginable. And then hanging from these nails, you would be in a position of inhalation. Your lungs would be completely expanded. You would have breathed in. The work of the cross was breathing out. You'd have to push up on your nailed feet and pull up with your nailed hands to breathe out. Every word that Jesus spoke on the cross while he was exhaling would have been extremely painful. How deliberate and precious each of those words were to Jesus. Now, if someone could no longer push up with his legs to breathe out, he would quickly die of suffocation within minutes. That is why they broke the legs of the 2 prisoners crucified with Jesus. The chief priests had requested that they be killed sooner so that their bodies would not be hanging there during that special Sabbath, the Sabbath day of the Passover feast. When they came to Jesus, he was already dead, so they did not break his legs, and none of his bones were broken, as it had been prophesied in Numbers and in Psalms. Lastly, I'd like to give you my thoughts on the actual cause of death of Jesus. Some of the prevailing theories are that Jesus died of hypovolemic shock or excessive blood loss. Others believe that he may have had a respiratory arrest or he suffocated to death. Others have postulated that he may have had a cardiac rupture or a cardiac arrhythmia that caused his death. I don't believe that there is sufficient evidence in the scriptures to suggest that any of these causes of death actually took Jesus' life. If someone is dying of hypovolemic shock due to blood loss, there is a lack of blood flow to the brain, and the person becomes confused. He begins to talk gibberish and eventually becomes unconscious before eventually dying. Jesus did not demonstrate any lack of blood supply to his brain prior to his death. He deliberately spoke thoughtful and very specific words. Into thy hands I commit my spirit, and it is finished. Immediately after his last words, the gospel tells us that he breathed his last breath. Now, Jesus was a young and very healthy man prior to his crucifixion. He walked everywhere and was very active. It would be very unlikely for him to have died of asphyxia or respiratory arrest or even a cardiac arrhythmia after being crucified for only 6 hours. The other two men crucified with him did not show any signs of this either. Pilate also was recorded as being very surprised to hear that Jesus had died so soon after his crucifixion. It appears to me that Jesus died exactly at the time of his choosing, so that the scriptures would be fulfilled. He died when he did, so his legs would not be broken, so the spear would be put through his chest, so he would be taken down from the cross and prepared for burial and placed in a tomb on the Friday night before the Passover Sabbath. He gives us a clue of this in John 10:17. Jesus says, "The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life for the sheep. I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father." You see, I believe that Jesus was not murdered by the Jews or the Romans. He was not martyred by the hands of an angry mob. He was not killed by any man or system, nor did he succumb to some death blow or physiologic collapse. The one who walked on water, who calmed the sea with a word, who healed the paralytic and shouted, "Lazarus, come forth!" He voluntarily laid down his life for us. The one who gave us breath deliberately breathed his last breath for us.
Luke 23. By this time, it was about noon, and darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. The light from the sun was gone, and suddenly the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn down the middle. Then Jesus shouted, "Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands." And with those words, Jesus breathed his last. When the Roman officer overseeing the execution saw what had happened, he worshiped God, and he said, "Surely this man was innocent." When all the crowd that came to see the crucifixion saw what had happened, they went home in deep sorrow. But Jesus' friends, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance, watching. Now there was a good and righteous man named Joseph. He was a member of the Jewish High Council, but he did not agree with the decisions and actions of the other religious leaders. He was from the town of Arimathea in Judea, and he was waiting for the kingdom of God to come. Joseph went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Then he took the body down from the cross, wrapped it in a long sheet of linen cloth, and laid it in a new tomb that had been carved out of the rock. This was done late on Friday afternoon, the day of Sabbath preparation, as the Sabbath was about to begin. When his body was taken away, the women from Galilee gathered, followed, and saw the tomb where his body was placed. Then they went home and prepared spices and ointments to anoint his body. But by the time they were finished, the Sabbath had begun. So they rested as required by Jewish law.
For the lonely and forgotten, for the weary and distressed, for the widow and the orphan, for the poor and the oppressed, for the stranger who has nothing. Does their sorrow reach your ears? Do you hear? Do you hear? Rise up, rise up. The earth will fear the Lord when you avenge the poor. May your kingdom come, oh, rise up. Hear how Rachel, she is weeping, how she will not be consoled, and the children in our keeping, are their bodies bought and sold? And the watchman, he is sleeping. Will they now avert their eyes? Will you rise? Will you rise? Rise up, rise up. The earth will fear the Lord when you avenge the poor. as your will is done in heaven. Let it now be done below. Let your daily bread be given. Let your kingdom seed be sown. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, we cry. Will you rise?